Welcome, everyone. Today we have Tom from Salesforce. He is a seasoned architect with more than 20 years of experience and 15 plus in Salesforce. Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm doing really good. How are you doing?
Pretty well. Thank you. So
Awesome.
before we go ahead, why don't you give a rundown of your current role and journey so far? How did you came into Salesforce?
Sure, I can give you a little bit. So, my current role, I'm a technical architect director, and I specifically work with schools, nonprofits, and then state and local governments in the US, where I will help them define their architecture strategy. We will, prior to starting any services engagement, so that we can make sure that the engagement is scoped correctly and then make sure that there aren't any big surprises as our teams are going in and filling out their Salesforce orders for them. As far as my overall journey goes, though, that's it's a little bit of a longer story. So, if career wise, we can talk about. I started out, got a degree in computer science.
Hmm.
Started out as a developer. Worked as a long time ago now. This is going back, but I was a C++ developer, and it was
I was about to ask it. What was your first language like?
yeah, C++, and then a language called Delphi. I don't know if you remember that, but it was like Visual Pascal.
Right.
Did that, worked with that for a couple of years, and what ended up happening was I had a manager who kind of said to me, look, I know you're a really good developer, but I noticed that you have really good communication skills too. Do you really like just writing code? Because I was in this scenario where it was like someone would give me a spec, I would just write the code and then turn it over to somebody else to test it. And he was like, if you really like doing that, that's great. But I think you'd really thrive in a role where you were communicating more with business stakeholders and doing more strategy type work. And I said, yeah, okay, that sounds good. So after a couple of years of that, what I ended up doing was I kind of worked my way into an architecture role, which at the time I was working with SAP
Hmm.
CRM. So this is also, going back, was an old on-premise system, and I was doing things like putting together the plans, like for the type of infrastructure we would need to stand up all the servers on, and then then how do you configure the CRM system, and then whatever middleware we needed to build to connect to like an ERP system. Um,
Tom, but what year it was? Like C++, like if you timestamp it, like just on year, not month.
oh, let's see. If I so I started in 1999, and I did that until about 2002. Combination of C++ and like Delphi development, and
Do you remember what kind of apps those were? Like, were those drivers or what are you
yeah.
building with C++?
Actually, there's a really interesting story I can tell you about this. So this is one of the things that honestly, it's kind of funny because I can talk about some pretty interesting stories and things I've done in my career. But one of the things I'm the most proud of happened really early in my career. So I was working for this telecommunications infrastructure company, which they made cell phone towers and antennas. And at the time, if you're thinking all the way back in the 90s, the time it took to design a cell phone tower was like weeks of manual calculations that engineers would have to do because just the processes were not automated. And if you look at cell phone towers and you notice they come in all different shapes and sizes, that's a specific reason for that. Because basically, if you design a tower that's too light and then a big gust of wind comes down and it comes crashing down on someone's house or a highway or something, obviously that's bad. But
Hmm.
also, if you're a business, you don't want it to be too heavy because someone's going to undercut you on the price because you're spending more money on steel than they are and everything. So the trick is, how do you design the lightest tower that can handle the load that you want to put on it? And that was just, like I said, it would take weeks of multiple engineers sitting down and calculating things out. And I was actually surprised that I was so young. I was just out of college, but my manager at the time was the same one I mentioned earlier, but he trusted me to design this piece of software that would take all of the calculations that someone had to do. I was working with this engineer in South Africa, and he would just send me math formulas that I would have to convert into code. And but what we did ultimately, we codified all of the different calculations that an engineer would have to do, figured out what the common inputs were, and got down to basically if you could put 6 inputs into this application, it would give you the type of tower that you needed to build and the price within about 30 seconds. So we reduced the time from weeks down to literally seconds that it took to design a tower. And that's cool. And it helped my company make a lot of money and all that. But the thing that I really liked about it is we started rolling out our this program in Africa, in like sub-Saharan Africa, and there were countries there at the time where people still didn't have landline phones for a reason that it was just in certain parts of the world, it's just really hard to build that type of infrastructure that would support having phone lines going all over. So what I ended up doing was, this program, while it made us a lot of money, at the same time, what it did was it helped us launch a massive build out of cellular networks across the entire continent of Africa. And what we ultimately ended up getting was we brought cell phone coverage to like hundreds of millions of people that had never even talked on a landline phone before. And then my company ended up getting an award from Thabo Mbeki. It was Nelson Mandela's vice president at the time, for everything that we did to improve the infrastructure throughout not only South Africa, but throughout the entire continent. So that was one of the first applications I built.
Yeah, this is actually interesting, and I have a 4 or 5 set of follow-up questions here. First of all, how did you ship the software? Did you use floppies, or you have CDs or pen drives? I think it's a floppy era, 1999.
It was still floppies. We did have a company website by then that we were able to package everything up and have people download, but it was still like, it was a Windows application. You would download it, you would install it locally, and when we eventually got kind of fancy and we built an integration with our company's ERP system, so that the idea was, our salesperson could sit down with a customer, design their tower, get them a quote, and then they could, click a button and submit an order into our ERP system. But at the time, even just being able to do that was like super advanced.
Yeah, I'm thinking what kind of APIs were there, because SOAP might be new as well at that time, because REST came way later on.
It was and this was a couple of years after we had built the initial version of the app. It was getting into the early 2000s, but it was SOAP at the time.
Okay, that's very interesting. So you said it's delivered on Windows, so it's a exe file which you have like offered as a download, and you said it's talking to your ERP. So how are you maintaining the conversation? Is it HTTP or some other protocol you're using?
It was HTTP. It was our TCP. Yeah. So the majority of the logic and the data and everything were stored locally. So what we did was we packaged up the entire application. The database was like actually a set of flat files that we had arranged the most strategic way possible so that they could be loaded into local memory without taking a lot of time at the beginning when the application was loaded. And then it was a single executable file. So it was fairly simple. And then the only time it would communicate back with the ERP system was when you get to that very end and the customer says, okay, I want to place an order. And then you say, okay, let's place the order. But that was about the extent of the communication. So,
wow, it touches so many old things. Do you remember the database? Was it Oracle or SQL Server was again too new? I think it came later on in 2004 or 5. It came to SQL Server.
It was just flat files. So we had arranged them built kind of a data model that was like a series of files that mimic database tables, but it was flat files.
Okay, very nice. And you're actually helping civil engineers to manage the steel and those calculations, architectural problem solving.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then fast forward to an SAP area. What timestamp that was in, like when you were building for SAP?
So the first SAP CRM implementation I did was 2000. And it was like SAP CRM version 4 on premise.
Okay.
Yeah, that was, and the funny thing is the reason I got that project to lead was actually because of that big tower planner project I had done, because it was basically that project was it was to help our salespeople talk to customers more easily and sell our products more easily. And so when we decided to roll out a CRM system, it kind of came to me because nobody really knew what CRM was yet. It was still pretty, there were Siebel and some other older type of CRMs out there at the time, but it just wasn't that commonly used. And basically someone said to me, you know what, you have the closest relationship with the sales team because you just built this other app for them. Why don't you lead the CRM project? And I said, yeah, sure. Not knowing that would then affect the whole rest of my career, but it was interesting. It was funny. So
right. But those are the times probably SAP is going out in CDs, right? 2003, because I remember working on Savient. It's a BizLogic platform. So they used to ship CDs for software upgrades, and people otherwise don't have that kind of internet to download huge MBs of it's an OS kind of thing. So it's a SAP on-premise CRM.
Yes.
All right. Very nice. And what language they were used to be, or what exactly you were doing? Like you're helping build processes on that? Or?
So it was ABAP was the language, but by that point I was doing more of the architecture. So I was doing a lot of the middleware, some of the configuration within the system itself, and then we had this was actually at the time pretty groundbreaking because SAP had their SAP CRM, their server. They also had a mobile client application that it wasn't constantly connected the way that you see like a mobile app that works today. It was more of just a client app that you would install on your laptop, so you didn't have to connect to the server. But salespeople that were out on the road, they could enter their data into this app, and then once a day or so, they would just sync the data. There was a small application that would download whatever updates from the server and then send your updates back. And at the time, it was a pretty good architecture because it was the best that was available. But when you look back now, you're like, okay, well, you don't really need to do that anymore. But it was
Mobile sounds fun because I remember I did a lot of Java backend in 2004, but there was no mobile. So what mobile they are catering to? Is it like BlackBerry or Windows Mobile and those type, or Nokia?
Actually, at the time, so we called it mobile. It was a client app for a laptop, and then
Okay.
eventually we did have a BlackBerry app as well.
Okay, very nice. So 1999 C++, 2000 SAP CRM. By the way, I liked your point which you mentioned that typically programmers, they are very isolated and they just as you said, like give me spec, I will push it out and get done. But the communication piece is missing out. So that actually makes you stand apart and grow quickly into
Yeah.
different dimensions. So this is just a shout out to audience, like this is a skill to watch out for.
Yeah, for sure. And the funny thing is, I know plenty of great programmers who actually prefer that. Like, they don't want to deal with like having a lot of people talking to them all day. They want to get, hey, just give me a spec, tell me what to build, and I'll build it. And either way is a good career path. It just depends on you. You have to really think about what you prefer, I think. So
Right, right. I mean, I've seen all variations of it. At times, people love to go deep, but then they get bored because now next year I'm still getting a spec and I'm getting bored of that. There's no newness in that. And then you do this thing like you go like in a breath, but then you
yeah,
get bored and you feel missing out that I'm not going deep also. So it's a
yeah.
interesting crossover.
That's true. You do get to a point, I think, where you feel like you're kind of solving the same problem over and over again, just in a slightly different way. But yeah, I can see that.
Right. But with advent of AI and everything like co-pilots, do you think com skill is now actually a key skill? Because now majority of heavy lifting coding, not as of now, maybe in next 1 year, will be easily done by maybe the GitHub or VS Code, Code Assistant, whatever it is, by a Salesforce or anybody else.
It, I think that what it'll do is it'll speed up the time to do some of the mundane coding tasks. But what I really think is that you're still going to want somebody like an actual person that can, number one, review the code and make sure that it's actually well written, because I've seen some AI generated code that's like really good that I'm like, wow, this is better than anything I could have written. And to be fair, I haven't written any, a lot of code in a long time, but I've also seen some AI generated code where I can look at it and be like, this is just, complete garbage. Like it's making a database call repeatedly within a loop or something like that, is just a straight up anti-pattern. Yeah. So I think you still need an experienced developer who can look over any code before it goes to production and just check it and, make sure that it looks well. And then in addition to all the testing and everything, the other thing that I think what we'll start seeing more of is now that you have, AI that can generate code for you, and then, yeah, maybe you have to review it, but the role that I would see developers that are going to start playing more is orchestrating things. So now you can build an automation a lot quicker than you used to be able to before the advent of AI. So what that means is if you need multiple automations that need to work together, you can spend the time thinking more about, well, how do these automations need to work? What's the right way to do this? Do I really need one class or do I need a bunch of other classes that are connected to each other? And you can really think about the technical architecture in a way that, it was one of those things that we always knew that you're supposed to do, but sometimes there's not a lot of time to do that because you have to get things rolled out and everything. Now you have more time to think about that stuff, and and
Yeah,
hopefully
that's
we'll
an
start.
interesting point actually. Because previously it was like, okay, code quickly and get it done. We'll think of architecture at times later on when
Yeah,
the things actually go out of control mostly. But
right.
now you know that code is easy, you will eventually get it. But
Yeah,
one interesting thing I've seen with AI is it's an overconfident liar at times. Like it gives you such a well laid out code that you
yeah,
at once are like tricked actually. Like is it really uh I mean true? And at times it's not working and it's something else totally.
I know. I've seen that. One of the other things that I've noticed too with AI and a lot of these LLMs, they get their code samples from like Stack Exchange and Reddit, and so what ends up happening, and one of the things I've been noticing is you're not seeing as many new submissions to Stack Exchange and because people are using AI to generate their code. Well, at a certain point, you're going to hit a limit where now I need to do something that isn't, the LLM
Not before.
find it. Yeah,
Yeah.
nobody. So I'm going to need to figure this out myself, and maybe I can get part of the way there with AI, but I still need to use my own brain. Like I think there's never going to be a time where you're going to be able to design an entire complex application completely from scratch without even thinking about it, and just let AI do it. Like
Right. That will be a point where you have a calculator and you can't use it anymore. You have to do it on your
yeah,
own on a pen and paper. So
exactly.
it will hurt a lot of people, including me also, because I think I have stopped going to Stack Overflow for anything. It's Perplexity or ChatGPT
Yeah,
mostly.
exactly. Yeah.
So, right. But I think we're on your journey. So we are till 2003. So how did things move from there and how did Salesforce happen?
So let's see. So from 2003, I so I stayed with that company for a little while. That we implemented their CRM system, and then I left to do consulting.
Hmm.
And I was an SAP CRM architect, and I was working at this consulting company that specifically worked with like small and mid market businesses. So
Hmm.
basically, they were like companies that are big enough that they need like an ERP and a CRM, like enterprise systems, but they're not big enough that any of the big global implementation partners would have time to work with them because it would just be too small of an implementation. So I was working for this company. They were called Intelligence. I think they've been
Hmm.
acquired since, but they were kind of the sweet spot for that. I was there. They hired me specifically for my SAP CRM knowledge because they had a couple existing customers that were using SAP CRM and they needed some help, and they didn't have anybody on staff that had that skill. But one of the things I started noticing was I was joining a lot of pre-sales calls and doing a lot of presentations. Every time SAP CRM came up, all of these prospective customers would say things like, well, okay, the ERP system makes sense. We need that for our back office processes, or we're doing supply chain management or whatever. But for CRM, SAP is just so complicated. It's just bloated. It has all this like extra functionality we're never going to use. It's expensive. And so instead of SAP, there's this new website we found called Salesforce.com, and it has this online CRM, and we're just going to use that. And this is at the time, so this is maybe 2008, 2009. So, like Salesforce had been around for almost 10 years at that point, but it didn't really start growing until, around that time period.
Yeah, that's the
And
time when Salesforce hit me also, 2008 and 9. It actually came to India also.
yeah,
So,
but I started to see the writing on the wall, and I'm like, all right, I feel like if I stay on the path that I'm on, I'm going to hit a wall with my career where I'm not going to be able to go any further, and the opportunities are going to start drying up pretty soon. Maybe I should learn Salesforce. and
mhm.
um, and I got lucky enough that I was able to find a job at a company that had both SAP and Salesforce. And what they originally hired me for was they were using SAP CRM to run their call centers. So basically, the SAP had kind of the equivalent of Service Cloud, where you could do case management and telephony integration and all of those things. But they also had their field sales employees were using Salesforce, and they had just bought their own subscriptions to Salesforce. Like it wasn't approved by their IT department or anything. But what ended up happening was they bought their subscriptions, suddenly realized like, oh, it'd be really great if we could integrate this with our SAP ERP system, and it could. And what I did was I convinced the vice president that I was reporting up to at the time that SAP CRM, Salesforce, they're both CRM. They should just both go under me because I'm the
You
CRM
know,
guy.
the CRM and the enterprise space. Yeah.
And the nice thing was because the Office Max was the company, and Office Max is gone. Well, they were acquired a few, maybe 10 years ago now. But basically, what ended up happening was the VP, when I approached him and said that, he was so happy to have somebody that was willing to take on Salesforce because
Ownership and everything.
yeah, they were. He was kind of like, all right, if you want that, it's all yours. Go ahead and take it.
Right.
And I use that as an opportunity to kind of transition. So I spent the rest of my time at that company kind of supporting both. And then when I felt like I had done enough work with Salesforce that I had learned it pretty well. And at the time, that was still fairly early, that like 2009 timeframe. Like there weren't that many Salesforce professionals in the market.
True.
So I was able to pretty easily make a jump because it was that kind of sweet spot where there weren't a lot of people that really knew the platform, but there were a lot of companies that were starting to implement it. So after that, I just kind of started exclusively looking for Salesforce projects. And I had over the years maybe done one or two other, like helped with a couple SAP implementations here and there, just because there was still paying pretty well and I could do it. But for the most part, it was ever since that I focused on Salesforce and been working ever since.
Right. How did you like the transition? Like SAP must be like a desktop kind of app, and Salesforce is all in browser, and browsers were not that great in that time.
No.
So it's a little lethargic experience to work on a browser.
Yeah, they were. Well, the one thing that was nice is it was still in the early days when it was Salesforce Classic, and a lot of the processing was done on the server side. So the experience wasn't terrible. It was kind of the UI was kind of clunky and but it got the job done. And honestly, I kind of right away, it was like, well, I can see why companies are wanting to go with this over SAP because, something that might have taken me 10 or 12 steps to configure in an SAP system, I could think about like, okay, how would I want to do this in Salesforce? And it would be maybe 2 or 3 steps. And the nice thing, and since I already had been working just with CRM in general for so many years at that point, it was more what I had to train myself is to think about like, okay, how would I do this in Salesforce? And then a few of the other like limitations, because it's well, in the browser is one thing, but it's also the whole multi-tenant architecture and making sure that you stay within some of the processing limits and things like that. And I had to consider that. But after a while, when you do that stuff long enough, it kind of starts to become second nature. And then I loved it. And I got to a point where I was like, this is great. I'm not gonna look back from this. So.
Right. And I think, as you said, I think second nature or our patience level actually changes. Firstly, like full page refresh, it used to be normal, like everybody's having that. Then gradually partial refreshes and those fast screens came into place. So that classic was really nice that way.
Yeah, exactly. And then when browsers did start to get better, and then you start seeing more computers have like more local memory and everything, then we could make the transition to Lightning and see more of the processing can get done on the client side. And then that actually gives you even more flexibility with what you can do with the platform then too.
Right. And I think I have some overlap because my lot of parts since 2008 when I moved into Salesforce, I was actually building both Java client server and desktop apps. There is a framework which Eclipse used. I forget its name. So that is sort of like Java also. Totally missing out on the name. So then I used to compare, okay, JSF, this thing is happening. Salesforce has JSF behind the scene. This thing is happening, Apex. So it was mostly like overlapping what I had in Java and then enjoying the transition.
Oh, that's
more
cool.
something. Yeah.
That is a good way to think about it. Is I've heard Apex described as it's basically Java, but it has awareness of the database already.
Right.
Which is kind of I know that's not exactly what it is, but at least at a high level, it's a good way to think about it. So.
Right. And actually, that was my feeling. As you said, like in my Java days, I used to write XML files for database mapping between Java classes, POJOs, and those things. But now, as you said, like in Apex, it's a mapping done already. You don't have to map the things. You just write Apex code and it's automatic. ORM, or what do you call ORM mapping? Those are done. Yeah. So it's a fun ride that way. Okay, you don't have to do one thing.
Right.
All right. So we are in 2008, right? Right now, 2010, fast
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah. And so I spent the next few years leading these like just massive transformational projects
Mm-hmm.
at these big Fortune 500 companies, and I would do Salesforce, but it would be a mix of Salesforce, and then by the time I was working at Miller Coors a few years later, I was doing more like enterprise architecture. So figuring out where Salesforce fits into the overall landscape of an organization, thinking through things like org strategy and just overall data strategy, integration strategy, and everything. And then, the way that I looked at it was I can help design your entire IT landscape, but I can go deep on Salesforce and the CRM pieces of it. And I did that for a while. And one of the things that I started to realize was that I had a stronger drive that I wanted to like do something that was going to give back and help people out. So I have to go back a little bit further in my even before my career started. So to give you a little bit of background about myself, when I was really young, my mom and I were homeless for a little while,
Mm-hmm.
and we relied on a lot of nonprofits and a lot of like local government agencies to help us get food and clothes and things. And then when I got a little bit older, we found a place to live, but we ended up living with somebody that was really abusive. So my mom and I, like, we survived like a really bad, like physically abusive relationship for about 6 years. And then after that, my mom started like her health started to fail, and she passed away really early when I was really young. And that kind of affected the way that I see the world in general. So one of the things I like, if I actually go back to the tower project I mentioned earlier, it was exciting for me to work on that because it helped me see the power that I could have, like using my skills to help other people. And
Yeah.
then as time went along, I started to realize, like, okay, I'm working for these really big companies. I'm making a lot of money. I'm doing interesting work, but do I really feel like I'm giving back the way that I want to be giving back? And
Right.
so I ended up deciding, when I was at Miller Coors, I left. And the funny thing is I left on really good terms. Like, I'm still friends with a lot of my old coworkers from Miller Coors because I actually had told them that, like, look, I just feel like I have to do something that's more, like it's going to have more of a social impact. And everyone was like, no, I understand. Like, a lot of people kind of knew my story and my background, and they were like, no, you have to go do what you feel is the right thing to
Definitely.
do. So I left. The first thing I did was I got a job it was as a consulting company that was working for the city of Chicago. We were leading their non-emergency communications. They completely were redesigning everything. And I was the architect on that. And I looked at that as this is kind of the direction I want to be going in, because I'm helping my other citizens that live in Chicago, which is where I live. They're getting access to city services more easily, and that could be things like like welfare payments or like mental health services, or a variety of different services that the city offers. So I'm like, this is good. This is close. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and then in 2018, I got a call from a recruiter from, at the time it was Salesforce.org, which was
Yeah, it's a non-profit startup back and those things.
yeah, and I was like, okay, this is really what I want to be doing. So basically, Salesforce.org, it was a separate company, but it was still part of Salesforce. It was like a division of Salesforce, but it operated autonomously, and it was working with schools and nonprofits primarily. And my original job was to do architecture strategy with these organizations who were doing really good things for the world and needed somebody to help them use Salesforce to, increase their impact and, help with their missions, but they would never be able to afford a full-time Salesforce architect. So
Right.
I would work with them and talk through their IT strategy, talk through their architecture strategy, help them design something. And then if they would have a partner come in and do their implementation, I would kind of provide some oversight to make sure things were going well. And I did that for about 3 years, really loved it. One of the other things that I was
But
doing,
Tom, 1 second. I think Salesforce.org flashes a lot of memory. I think Cumulus CI, I came
oh
to
yeah,
know, or I think
yeah,
studied from their website only.
Yeah.
NPSP starter pack and the set of packages, I think it's one of a good case study of how managed packages should be structured, configured. They have actually laid out architectural guidance for many to follow. If I think it's known for non-profits, but this
Yeah.
is a deep technical angle of what all they have done for other technical people, not just non-profits.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, Jason Lance, he and I still talk pretty regularly, and he's kind of gone off and started his own company now called Muse Lab.
Mm-hmm.
But he's still doing a lot of great work in the nonprofit space also, and he's a great guy to know. And then yeah, Cumulus CI, and like you said, the way that NPSP, and to also to an extent EDA, which was like the equivalent on the education side, but they were a really good, just living example of how do you design managed packages and come up with a good strategy for packaging. And then Cumulus CI was a great deployment tool, and it
Right.
still.
Because we are a PTO, we used to follow what Salesforce.org managed packages have in setup screens, how they're using custom metadata types, how they're
Yeah,
managing multiple packages. There is a gold standard of specifications everywhere.
yeah, exactly. It's a great tool to work with, and I know now it's been kind of we're migrating to nonprofit cloud, but the NPSP it was great to work with.
Right. But Tom, from your experience, like you work with nonprofits, typically, like even with Salesforce or without Salesforce, what are two or three biggest problems which you have seen in common on terms of technical side with nonprofits?
I think so. Probably the biggest challenge for nonprofits is what ends up happening a lot of times is number one, nonprofits have a difficult time being able to afford really skilled IT
Technical
folks.
resources.
Some of the really bigger ones can, but there's some mid-sized nonprofits that they either have to contract out or they'll get somebody that's like doesn't really have a strong background in IT, but they're really eager to learn. Or what they'll do is they'll have some well-meaning companies that will come in, offer to give them free services, and that company maybe isn't the greatest, but what ends up happening with nonprofits is they have a lot to kind of untangle technically. So there's a lot of technical debt that we find from an architecture perspective. The other thing is nonprofit is kind of it's kind of a mishmash of organizations. So if you think about like an industry like telecommunications is a good example. So, there's a bunch of, if you think about AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, Orange, you can name all the different like telecommunications carriers. They all have their little nuances about the way that they're going to go to market with their products and services and the way that they do business. But at the end of the day, there's like a lot of processes that are common across all of them.
Right.
Nonprofits, that's not really the case because a nonprofit can be an animal charity. Like I actually have my own nonprofit that does transport services for homeless animals. But another nonprofit is working to cure cancer, and another nonprofit is working to help refugees that are in a country that they need to find homes for. And then there's another. I actually worked with a nonprofit once that provided financial like retirement packages for clergy members and people that worked in churches. So because they were considered a religious organization, they were a nonprofit, even though they functioned more like any financial services company. And so the challenge is you can't really go into a nonprofit thinking, okay, I know all the
There's a template to follow, and
there's not, yeah, exactly. There's no
yeah.
other than like they kind of, for the most part, they all need to like manage their donors and donations. But other than that, their actual operations are going to be completely different from one organization to another, a way that's, I would say, unlike any other industry. So that's always one of the biggest challenges too.
True, true. I think that's very well said because every nonprofit truly is solving a different problem, though they are all put into the same umbrella
Yeah.
of nonprofits.
Exactly. The other thing is there's, Salesforce, I think, started this with our 1-1-1 model where we give away a lot of free software to nonprofits. But what started happening was a lot of other tech companies started doing that because they saw, wow, this is a great cause. And it's like a noble thought to do it. But the other thing, I've gone into some nonprofits that have so much free software from so many different vendors because they, somebody comes by and says, hey, do you want this for free? And they say, yeah, but they don't know how all those things fit together. And, so they end up with just their data is a mess because they have, some data over here and some over here, and the systems aren't integrated because nobody knew how to connect them. And you find that a lot too. And talking through that with a nonprofit and sitting down and saying, okay, well, great that you have this big pile of free things, but let's approach it strategically. Number one,
what really makes sense?
Yeah, what makes sense? And then how do you want to approach implementing these? What do you want your system of record to be for each type of data, for example? And that's something that a lot of, especially some of the more mid-sized nonprofits, you don't really see people thinking through as much.
Right. And I think that happens to a good extent to the 10 free Salesforce licenses also, because everybody comes, they change what they know about Salesforce in their own way. And then eventually you end up in a strange kind of org, which is actually very tough to take it forward from there.
Yes. There's been a few times where the advice I've given is, since you have your 10 free licenses, you'd be better off contacting your sales rep, asking them to transfer those licenses to a brand new org, and let's just start over, because it's been so, you have so much technical debt here that it's going to take longer to
fix everything
than it's going to take.
Yeah. True. Because everybody has done things in their own way, whatever they know, and it's somehow a music coming together, but not easy to fix from there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I don't know how we can fix that. I really love what Salesforce is doing. 10 free licenses, really good, and it mostly solves a good deal of problem for many nonprofits of small size. But again, this implementation, quality, technical debt, it's an ongoing fight.
Yeah, it is. And the thing about that too is I don't think that's specific to Salesforce. I think that's in general across the board, where somebody, you get software and you have the people, even if you're not a nonprofit, you could be a small business that just doesn't have the people or the skills to be able to implement whatever CRM system you want. And you end up later with a mess, and you start realizing, well, we're paying a lot of money for this and we're not getting value from it. So let's take a step back and think about the way that we implemented it. And that actually kind of leads to why we ended up creating the well-architected framework too.
Right. Yeah, but I think you're right. It's not just Salesforce. I've seen people using Google Workspace in an interesting way, especially Google Drive.
Yeah.
Like they download file, upload files, and they don't know that versioning still exists. And it's not just for nonprofits, for good enterprises who are coming from Excel and Microsoft Word.
Yeah.
So exactly. It's a funny thing that way. But you're coming to Well Architected. How did that whole thing started?
Yeah. So one of the things I was doing at Salesforce.org, so I kind of realized at a certain point that I was working for a great team, and we had about 15 people on our team. We were all really experienced architects, but still, there's 15 of us. We can't help every nonprofit. Like there's only a certain level that we're going to be able to scale up to. And I started thinking, well, there's still got to be ways to get this knowledge out for nonprofits or schools or whoever. So I started writing blog posts that would just have like an architecture topic that, could be, how do you build an integration strategy, or something a little more tactical, like how do you integrate Salesforce and Tableau, or something like that. And, I would just publish this monthly. And then I also started a video series on, there was a streaming channel called Trailhead Live, which was kind of the early version of Salesforce Plus. And I had a streaming show called Architect Academy, which is basically, I would do kind of like what we're doing now. I would interview somebody from a nonprofit. I would talk about their background of their organization, but then also like, what's an interesting problem you've solved with Salesforce? And we talked through the architecture and everything. And that actually caught the attention of the person who ended up becoming my manager. Her name was Zane Turner, and she was the person who led the well-architected team for a while. So she was working on putting this team together. At the time, Parker Harris, who's a co-founder of Salesforce, was looking for a way to do architect-level enablement at scale, because he was kind of seeing that as a gap out in the marketplace. And so he had brought Zane over. Zane was part of the developer relations team for a while. That she was doing a lot of creating a lot of her content and speaking at a lot of conferences and everything. Mm-hmm. Parker brought her over to lead this new architect relations team. And Zane had already known me within Salesforce because of the work that I was kind of doing, that it was almost like a side job where I'm like making all these videos and writing blog posts in addition to my regular day job of actually working directly with customers. And when she got the green light to create this team, she reached out to me and said, hey, it'd be great if you could join us. And I said, yeah, okay, I can see that because, even when I think back to my original goal of I want to do something impactful and, have and help people, I kind of saw that as kind of a nice evolution of now I get to, since there's only, I can work with individual organizations myself all I want. And I'm never going to finish working with all of them.
Right.
But if I can do something at scale that can kind of help enable the ecosystem, then what we can do is we can create more architects that are out there that are going to work with more organizations. So I said, okay, yeah, let's do that. And came over and we created, along with a few other coworkers. So, Susanna Plaisted was there, Mark Braga, there, Shobi Abdi. There were a bunch of other architects that we recruited over the years, and we built the architect.salesforce.com website and the Salesforce well-architected framework, and did that for about 3 years. We built it out, spent some time traveling around and doing some enablement, and just recently there's been some changes within Salesforce, and we've kind of gone to other teams. So I'm back to working with nonprofits and schools again, but we had created that, and the architect website is still out there, and it's got a lot of great resources on it. So.
Yeah, truly, truly. I've seen many guys refer to those templates, blueprints, and things which you are like later. So when was this started? Like you were in Salesforce.org, probably 2021?
2018, I joined Salesforce.org.
Okay.
And then at the end of 2021, I went over to the well-architected team.
So with all this thing happening, like I see you're coming back to Salesforce.org. Where is well-architected heading, especially in terms of AI? With the way I think Salesforce is putting a lot of bucks into Agentforce marketing and content and everything around Agentforce.
I think some of that's still TBD. I think that'll be our leadership's still working through some of those discussions about what's the future of the website going to be, and how does it fit in with AI and everything. So so just at the end of last year, so at the end of 2024, I kind of made the move back to my original. Salesforce.org technically doesn't exist anymore because it's been acquired by Salesforce, but my old team still exists. So I kind of made the move back to rejoin my old team. So it's been great.
Perfect. Perfect. So now coming to the AI side, now the interesting point for me is how are nonprofits seeing AI? Is it like really that hype? They want to try something on AI, like even for simple use cases like email generation or anything? What's their take?
We have seen, so we're starting to see some interest on the nonprofit side. And I can tell you, interestingly, I mentioned that I've got my own nonprofit, and this is one of the things that I'm even playing around with Agentforce when I have the chance, because it's like a thing I do in my spare time. But I'll give you an example of a pretty good use case that I came up with for my organization. So we do transports for homeless animals. So
okay.
The way that things would work is, let's say so I live in Chicago, and let's say I want to adopt a dog. So I go online and I find, the exact breed and the exact, maybe I want like a female Labrador retriever that is 2 years old. And I find one, but she's, all the way in Nashville, Tennessee, which is like a 6-hour drive from here. What we'll have, my organization has a network of volunteers that will do like a relay where somebody will drive the dog from Nashville to maybe, there's my dog in the background.
He's listening.
Yeah. From Nashville, like Louisville, Kentucky, for example. And then they'll hand them off to somebody that'll go to Indianapolis, and somebody else will come to Chicago where they can meet me. And then that way I don't have to worry about it, driving all the way down. And whatever shelter I've adopted that dog from, they're not limited to just their local community. So they can, we actually have volunteers that can drive all over the United States. And one of the things that I was thinking, would be a great use case for an agent, and this is something we're working on building, is right now coordinating all of those transports and figuring out all the places for somebody to, all the drop-off points and the handoff points. It's a lot of work. We have at this point, we've got thousands of volunteers. And so figuring out who the best volunteers are to find, along a certain route, that's a lot of work. And so what I'm working on building is an agent that will look through our entire database, identify the right drivers. If I say I want to transport this type of dog from this city to this city, here's the dates. All of our drivers have preferences for what do they, is there a certain size limit? How far are they willing to drive? All that. So look up all their preferences and then send out a bunch of communications to those drivers that say something like, are you available at 2 p.m. on Saturday to assist with this transport? And then, if they reply yes, great, add them on. If they reply no, then, find the next best person that's available and send them up. And
you're automating these like yes and no responses, maybe via SMS.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for. And we'll see how far we get with that, but that's the ultimate goal. And right now I'm happy with just being able to pick out the route and identify the drivers. But the more as Agentforce evolves, I would like to start to add in more of those capabilities of send somebody a text message and have them reply yes or no, and then and then make the adjustment from there based on what they do. So we're not there yet, but when I can see that not that far off. So,
right.
So that's an example.
So it's an early stage Uber for homeless dogs. Is it a correct way to put it? Yeah. Like it's sort of like Uber. You're finding driver. In Uber, there is always a driver who's listening to the mobile app, so they can say, yes, I want to take that drive. Yeah. But here you're trying to shoot that as an SMS and get an acceptance. And it's not an immediate thing. It's a slow moving thing. You can take it at ease 2 days, 3 days after.
Yeah, the nice thing is we usually have about a week in advance. Like if we're going to do a transport on like Saturday, we'll usually know by like Monday or Tuesday, and we'll be able to get all the confirmations and all that. So it's kind of the same idea.
Right. Do you need any help? I can just give a shout out to people who want to assist you with building anything on this nonprofit side. Because as I said, I think all nonprofits are short on technical people.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. Sure. So what's your nonprofit called?
Positively Famous. So PAWSITIVELY, and then
PAW is that PAW.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Oh, very nice. Positively Famous.
Okay. Yeah. So would love to any suggestions or if anybody is interested, that'd be great.
Sure. We probably need a directory for nonprofits to publish like what they need help with, because there are many Salesforce partners who have bench available. So it's a good training for their team also to just step in and maybe help out without expecting dollars and things.
Yeah, that is true. I've got a few volunteers that I'm working with right now. And I've seen a few unofficial lists that people have put together of nonprofits that are looking for help, but they're all kind of like independent lists that are maintained by people based on the organizations that they know. It would be nice if there was something that was a little more central.
Right. Because I see people fighting for projects, and again, I mean, especially in India, I see people do have bench mostly with these consulting partners. So this is a good probably use. But I think we're on a different topic. So then you are back on salesforce.org, and we're talking about AI. So you see like people are still not somehow excited, or how do you put it? Like, how do they see this whole agents and these things coming up?
I would say there's a lot of interest, definitely. And I think right now we're still working through specific use cases for a lot of organizations, but I think everybody understands the power of it and how much it's going to help their organization. And now what it is okay, now let's make sure that we're using the right tool to accomplish the right job. And then, let's see what we can build out and use. But there's definitely a lot of interest, and it seems to be increasing more and more, like with almost every conversation I have. So it's definitely like the velocity is picking up for sure.
Right. So if again, I think if you talk about the agentic side, and we try to take that up, and like there is an agent for sales coaching, there is a service agent. So if you have to see like 3 or 4 agencies, probably people can build for nonprofits. I know you said nonprofit is a very scattered space. It's just not a generic umbrella. Right. So how will you? I think it's a vague question. It's a very open-ended question. But again, the kind of agents you see, like a nonprofit can benefit from.
Let's see. So probably one of the biggest things that a nonprofit can benefit from is on the donor and donation management side. You could have an agent that helps guide someone through the different types of donations they can make because different organizations. That's one of the other things about nonprofits is some of them take monetary donations, others take different types of supplies, clothing, food, everything. So being able to help donors understand what they can donate, how they can donate, and then what the tax implications are for them, maybe in their specific country that they're donating from. And then on the service recipient side, so the nonprofits that have their actual programs, this is going to vary widely from nonprofit to nonprofit, but helping somebody find access to the services that your organization has to offer, and being able to answer questions about what types of services are available to, if you're helping to find jobs for people that are, on the verge of becoming homeless, for example. I know there's a nonprofit in Chicago that does that. Kind of helping people figure out, number one, what's even available, and then how do you apply to the program, and kind of helping people walk through that process where somebody might not be super computer literate, but they still need to know how to give their information to this organization. And it might be easier to work with an agent that can just ask questions more conversationally than just making them, fill out a bunch of forms that they don't know how to fill out. So
Making the other people understand nonprofit better, like in a conversational manner, that kind of agent.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's interesting. So people who are listening, maybe it can be a good sidekick or a good app for you to build an agent who is helping with donations and maybe understanding the nonprofit business. This is lovely. And maybe moving towards the end, and I think it's a very popular question, Tom, is how do you see roles impacted? Like Agent Force is there. Now people are building startups who are building Agent Force agents also. There's a lot happening in this. And then there are people who are building setup agents who are doing sysadmin jobs. So where do you see this all going, and what will be like 2026 or 27 like?
I think one of the biggest shifts that people are going to need to think about is, number one, is just learning the AI skills in general. But also one of the biggest differences, I think, is rethinking your own logic and the way you approach problems, right? Because if you're thinking about typical code, like, Java or whatever, you write a bunch of if-then statements, or, maybe it's a case statement where you can pick. But an agent it's not specifically following that logic, right? It's more like just having a conversation with a person that's going to make their decision, and you don't design an agent the way that you would write, like a Java class or whatever. So that, I think, is going to be a big mindset shift that people need to think about. And I think for anybody that's willing to kind of make that shift and start, focusing on that, and, focusing on how you can use that capability to solve business problems, there's going to be a lot of opportunities that start to get created for people that can do that. So.
Right. And as you said, like acquiring basic AI skills, so that probably includes prompt engineering, because that is. So any good courses which you can recommend people, like which you really like, or prompt engineering?
We're seeing more and more courses that are coming out, like on Trailhead, and if you're specifically interested in Salesforce and Agentforce. The other thing that I will say, though, is when I first started working with AI, this was like a few years ago still, I took a lot of the courses on OpenAI offers some of their own, and they've got a lot of free courses that are really good to take as well. So if you're interested in just general, how does an LLM work, and where it's more like platform agnostic of just, how does this tool work, I would maybe look into one of those. It's the AI Foundation, which is like a nonprofit that's kind of associated with OpenAI. And then specifically for Agentforce and Salesforce, then Trailhead has probably the best, and they're coming out with more, like almost on a daily basis at this point. So those are great resources as well.
Right. So understanding prompt engineering, LLM, these are the foundation things.
Yeah.
And anything like for specific roles, like if I say QA, we have not talked about QA. How do you see QA evolving in these times?
That's a good one. I haven't thought about that one as much, but logically, if you think through it, you could build an agent that you give it a test strategy, it'll go through and do whatever testing you need to do and then give you a report pretty quickly about what failed and what passed versus
Hmm.
in the past, you would have a group of people that were sitting at their desks clicking buttons and, selecting different values and pick lists and seeing what happened. So you could probably complete that a lot more quickly.
Right, right. Perfect, perfect. I think with that, Tom, we are near the end of the podcast. Any message for the Salesforce community who are listening, like about Agent Force or anything which is close to your heart, which you want to convey?
I think the big thing is I know there's a lot of change going on right now, and it's not even just in Salesforce, across the entire tech industry. And I don't think my whole career, if you remember, I started all the way back in 1999, and so I went through the dot-com boom and the Great Recession of 2008 and all that, and things have changed. There have been times where things have changed quickly, but I don't remember them changing this quickly. But
Just quickly, true.
the one thing that is nice though is whenever there's a lot of changes like this, it always does create opportunities. So I think the biggest thing, message I would give is I know there's a lot going on right now and everything, but there's a lot of great opportunities out there, and it's just a matter of making sure that you're ready for them.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. It's a crazy time. I mean, you start learning something and it becomes obsolete within a month or two, or maybe even sooner.
Yeah, yeah, it's true.
So, all right, Tom, I think it's really great having you. I know we have a lot to cover, but we are at an hour mark. So maybe an episode two with you. But again, thanks a lot for being here and really loved all this insight, especially on the non-profit side. It's a little less talked topic mostly.
Awesome. Yeah, glad I could help, and it was great to be here and great to talk to you. And we'll talk again soon.
Sure. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.